Have you seen The Postman?
The United States doesn't exist!
Sometime during the post-apocalyptic second term of Barack Obama, the Postman, aka Shakespeare, call him what you will, makes his way across the war, disease, famine-torn America in order to deliver the mail. But standing in his way are a group of militiamen who rule with their 8 codes and an iron fist, and with a deep hatred of junk mail. I decided to review this movie because I have never heard of it. I saw it one day on Roku and I decided to watch the trailer, and it piqued my interest. After watching it, I was like, hey, I wonder what people thought about this movie. So I pulled it up on Rotten Tomatoes, and lo and behold, to my shock, it was sitting at 14% by the critics. And then I pulled it up on Wikipedia, and I was given another shocking. The movie was nominated for 3 Saturns and won 5 Razzies. Now, the reason for all this disbelief is because the movie itself had a 60/61 IMDb user review, which didn't make any sense. Now, I know that people are generally friendlier than movie reviewers, and that many people like other movies that critics hate, like Waterworld, another Costner movie. But once you examine the reviews by the critics, you come to the realization that they didn't judge the movie for what it was, an independent film with just the same actor and director, but repeatedly compared it to other Costner films like Dances with Wolves, Waterworld, and Wyatt Earp. Now, this is a gross misuse of the reviewer's platform, and it helped bomb the movie. But if they didn't do that, is the movie actually any good that it could have actually turned a profit? Well, we'll get into that once we get done covering cast, director, and writer, and anything else that we should cover, such as, maybe a little history of the movie. But if you wish to jump ahead, here is the timestamp. Now, let's jump into it. So I want to mention both writers for this movie. The first one is David Brin, the book's writer. Brin is a Hugo, Locus, Nebula, Campbell Award winner, whose books I have never read. If you didn't know this movie was based on a novel, I don't think you would be the first. The 2 reasons I wanted to mention him, though, are 1, years ago during a post on his blog, he shared that he always wanted Kevin Costner to play the lead character, who in the book actually has a name. And in the movie, everyone just calls him Shakespeare or the Postman. The interest in Kevin Costner as the character came after him and his wife saw Field of Dreams, and thought that he would make a great protagonist in this movie. So I don't know if he had any influence on the selection. I would assume somebody within pre-production or during the shopping around period for buying of the book's rights may have asked him who they wished to see as the lead, but maybe not. And the life just has funny coincidences. Also, a little tidbit about the book's history. It was released in 1985, and within 5 years it was already being shopped around. That's pretty quick in the film novel world. Now, technically, it did take over 12 years for it to be officially made into a movie, so maybe not very quickly. Oh, and the reason for Kevin Costner was because they believed his character in Field of Dreams invoked the same kind of feelings that was sought for the Postman. Number 2, David Brin did not want to make this story, and eventually the movie, into another Mad Max story. So if you've seen Mad Max, then you know it's a post-apocalyptic hellscape where everyone worships men in bondage outfits, chrome, gas, and cars. It's a great series of movies with no consistent storyline, more like a series of tales told from a number of characters' point of view, with Max usually being the main character. But in those movies, all the characters are basically put into 2 categories, good and bad. The bad usually rule with an iron fist and control the food, water, and gas. They love to pillage, rape, and murder, while the good usually die in, droves and just wish to have a place to call home. But the world is absolute post-apocalyptic with no avenue back to life before. David Brin really didn't want that. He wanted the original concept of good and evil, with a tyrant ruling with an iron fist and poor people being killed and raided, but he wanted everyone to want to return to a time before the bad guy, to a time of the U.S., and the domino that Brin wanted that would encourage everyone to return to a simpler time was the delivery of mail. That a simple thing such as receiving the mail would be the crucible that would eventually lead to the people to crave and strive towards bringing back the U.S. After the mail, you create a council, eventually a senate and reps and a union, and in a blink of an eye, you're advancing through the decades of colonial United States toward modernism. Now on to the writer of the screenplay, Brian Hegleland. Now, before I go further into talking about Brian Hegleland and how he won a Razzie and an Academy Award in the same year, I have to mention that he is not the first writer. Eric Roth was the first writer to take a crack at the Postman. Eric Roth is a talented writer who has written movies such as Forrest Gump, Ali, A Star is Born, Dune Part 1 and 2, and Killers of the Flower Moon. But when it came to this movie, Roth refused to use the book as source material, according to Brin, and it turned the movie into everything that Brin didn't want it to be. One where the villain is the main character, living in a time where everyone is reveling in the collapse of society and no hope of return to what was before. So for possibly over a decade, according to Brin, Roth's script kept getting weirder and was scaring away talented directors and actors like Tom Hanks and Ron Howard. So after a decade of waiting, Kevin Costner finally grabbed the script and wanted to make the movie. The only issue was Roth's script. Costner, in what I assume was him throwing his weight around, scrapped the script and hired Hegleland. Hegleland, though, has his own impressive resume. Maybe not as impressive as Roth, still filled with great movies. He was the writer on movies such as Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Highway to Hell, A Knight's Tale, where he was the director and producer, Mystic River, which he was nominated for a BAFTA, Academy, and a Golden Globe, Man on Fire, Robin Hood 2010, 42, and his last movie, The Killer. But in 1997, the year that Hegleland won Best Screenplay from the Academy, he was also nominated by BAFTA and the Golden Globe. He also won the Worst Screenplay by the Razzies. And if you're wondering what movie was it that he won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay, well, that would be LA Confidential. So why did he win a Razzie for this movie? Well, we'll get a little further into that during the review section. Now, I'm going to have to bag on Kevin Costner for a minute or two. He's a wonderful director with a few movies he's directed, i.e. Dance with Wolves, Postman, and the American Saga, which is going to be 4 very long movies when they should have, been lonesome dubbed. But I think Kevin Costner is a talented director and an actor to a degree. He's no Daniel Day-Lewis or Gary Oldman, and his directing isn't Ron Howard or Steven Spielbergish, but his big issue as a director is that he doesn't know what to cut and what to remove. I always envision Kevin Costner sitting down with, X amount of film hours, and he whittles it down to 6 hours of working film, against his will. And then at the behest of the studio, he whittles it down to 3 hours, and he's confused when people are still urging him to go further. In his head, he already bit the bullet by getting rid of 3 hours. If he asks for more, then he doesn't know what he's showing. All he could think is that's not his movie. But Kevin Costner, if he ever releases the director's cut, it'll probably just be 24-hour-long movies with no intervals showing every itch, scratch, and sniffle. There are plenty of moments in this movie that are gratuitous and not needed, and aren't expanded on, which ultimately makes them worthless. So this movie definitely could have had another 30-ish minutes taken out, which would have allowed critics to be less harsh on it. But he's not a horrible director to the point that he deserves a Razzie like he won for this movie. But we'll do a deeper dive in the review section. James Newton Howard is our composer. The reason I really wanted to mention this guy was because I agreed with what David Brin said back in 1998 or so on his blog. Howard composed beautiful music that helped with emotions that we're supposed to feel for our main characters. But because of Costner's directing, music scenes and everything else really went on too long. Another reason I wanted to mention the composer was because he won a Razzie for Worst Song for this movie. This movie, by a long shot, does not have bad music. The Razzie was all a part of Hollywood's hatred for this movie, and how you can tell that Hollywood really just hated this movie for no apparent, or for maybe a little bit liberal or conservative apparent reasons. And also, it did not win so much Razzie for Worst Song. That was what was printed on the trophy. It won a Razzie for Worst Song. What song was nominated? The whole soundtrack. Not one song, the whole soundtrack. The music is one of the most beautiful things that really can't be nitpicky in this movie. James Newton Howard worked on numerous high-profile movies, writing or composing, including Nolan's Batman trilogy, that was composed by Hans Zimmer. The last few movies he's worked on have been the last three Hunger Game movies, which have good music even if you don't care for the movies themselves, and the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them films. So he knows music, and this movie aligns more with those films than movies that deserve a Razzie. And an interesting little tidbit about the soundtrack for this movie: if you go to look for it or buy it, it will not be 3 hours long. Warner Brothers whittled it down to 52 minutes. There are 5 main characters, 4 if you really focus on ones with consistent appearances throughout the whole movie, and those are Kevin Costner as the Postman, Will Patton as General Bethlehem, Lorenz Tate as Ford Lincoln Mercury, Olivia Williams as Abby, and Daniel Von Bargen as Prime View Sheriff Briscoe. Kevin Costner has had an illustrious career with a few fluctuations, mainly around the late 90s to about 2010. He's been in numerous movies, but his breakout role, which launched him into stardom, is one of my favorite movies, The Untouchables. After that movie, he would follow it up with Field of Dreams, Dances with Wolves, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, JFK, and The Bodyguard. But around the mid to early 90s, Costner hit a wall with box office bombs like Wyatt Earp, Tin Cup, The War, Waterworld, and The Postman. After that, his career would take a massive detour toward lesser-known movies for a better part of a decade. But in 2012, he would revive his career with the TV miniseries Hatfield and McCoys. From there, Costner would sign on to do another TV show, Yellowstone, and since then, his career has been improving. Just ignore what the critics say when it comes to the American saga. Will Patton, our ferocious villain in the movie, has had just as a long as career as Costner, maybe not as prolific, but he has appeared in numerous movies that are beloved by young and old. These movies would include OK Garage, Armageddon, The Punisher with Thomas Jane, Remembering the Titans, the Halloween Revival reboot Erasure, and the Costner's American Saga. But he has really found his bread and butter in TV. Now, his acting career for TV goes all the way back to the 80s with Search for Tomorrow. That's if you just focus on him being a main character. But if we zero in on what he's done in the last 15 years, well, he's been in Shots Fired, Swamp Thing, Yellowstone, Outer Range, half a season of Silo, and he's most well known for his television role, Captain Dan Weaver, in Falling Skies. Lorenz Tate has had a less than stellar career. Many of his most popular and well-known movies come from early 2000s or the mid-90s, with movies such as Menace to Society, Love Jones, and Love Come Down. Since then, he's been in a little bit of a downturn, but he may be able to break it back in with the upcoming musical drama Michael, where he'll portray Barry Goody. But Tate has never given up acting. He's worked on plenty of TV shows to keep his career alive, with shows such as Rescue Me, House of Lies, and quite recently Power and Power Book 2 Ghost as Councilman Tate. Olivia Williams, the most unrecognizable member of this movie. She looks very familiar to me, but I haven't really seen her in anything. But she has also had a pretty solid career. More smaller films that aren't in anyone's library of best movies. A few roles she's had been in that are memorable are Sixth Sense, X-Men Last Stand, I didn't say for good, Hannah, and Anna Karina. But she's also been in TV shows which have revived or propelled her, and those are The Nevers, The Crown, Dune Prophecy, Rings of Power as the Ent Wife, Wheel of Time. Like I said, it propelled her, up or down, depending on you. And finally, Daniel Von Bargen. The tragic story of Bargen. Throughout the 90s, he appeared in multiple movies, usually as a minor character, comedic relief, or background guy. Those movies were RoboCop 3, Silence of the Lambs, Rising Sun, G.I. Jane, Amistad, The Faculty, one of my favorite horror alien movies, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, Super Troopers, and a few more roles, and even in TV roles such as Malcolm in the Middle, before retiring from acting in 2009. The reason for his retirement is because by then his body was being devoured by diabetes. He had to have a foot and a few toes removed, all to stem the disease. In 2014, he tried to take his own life, but miraculously survived a gunshot to the temple. A few years later, in 2017, he would finally pass away from an undisclosed illness. In order to help tell this 3-hour movie plot as quickly as possible, I will be using Wikipedia's shortened plot. A lot may be missing, and a few big moments will probably just be quickly summarized, but, let's get started. In the late 20th century, unexplained apocalyptic disasters, implied to be World War III, devastate the world and destroy modern society. Since then, most knowledge and technology from the past have been lost, and the former United States has reverted to an unconnected, pre-industrial society. In 2013, an unnamed nomad traveling to St. Rose, Oregon, wanders the western United States, trading performances of long-forgotten Shakespearean plays for food and water. In one town, the nomad is forcefully conscripted into the Wholeness, a neo-feudalist militia with a cult-like obsession surrounding a misinterpreted self-help book that serves as a tyrannical authority in the region, led by General Bethlehem. The nomad, dubbed Shakespeare by Bethlehem, faces harassment by bigoted Captain Idaho, who tells the nomad about Colonel Getty, Bethlehem's second-in-command, and how Getty once challenged him for the right to lead. Bethlehem won the fight and mutilated Getty by cutting his tongue and castrating him.
Fight lasted 6 seconds, but he didn't kill him. Cut off his tongue. Then he cut off his balls.
The nomad and another conscript are sent to kill a lion, but Idaho arrives and forces the nomad and the conscript to fight to the death. Idaho kills the conscript, but before he can shoot the nomad, he is killed by the lion, allowing the nomad to escape by jumping into a river. He takes the refuge in an abandoned United States Postal Service Jeep, burning letters and wearing a long-deceased postal carrier's coat to stay warm. Now donning the postal uniform and mailbag, the nomad arrives in town of Pineview, where he is held at gunpoint by the leader, Sheriff Briscoe. Desperate to avoid execution but lacking any identification to secure his release, the nomad falsely claims to be a postman from the newly restored United States government, presenting a letter addressed to the elderly village Irene March as proof. The postman inspires a teenager named Ford Lincoln Mercury, who swears in as a postal carrier and helps reactivate the town's abandoned post office. The postman also meets spouses Abby and Michael and fulfills their clinical request to impregnate her. When the postman leaves for the town of Benning, he carries a pile of mail left at the post office by the townspeople. During a raid on Pineview, General Bethlehem learns of the postman's claims of a restored government in Minneapolis. Fearing his loss of power if word spreads, Bethlehem has the post office burned to the ground, kills Michael, abducts Abby, and raids Benning looking for the postman, who he does not know is the nomad.
All six! Justice can be dictated! Kill him! Kill the restored United States with him!
The postman surrenders, but Abby rescues him, and they flee into the surrounding mountains where they hibernate through the winter in an abandoned cabin. In the spring, they leave and encounter another postal carrier who reveals Mercury has kept the postal service alive by recruiting other carriers and opening more post offices, connecting settlements across the former U.S. and overtly forming a quasi-society in the restored United States. Bethlehem, threatened by the rise of the restored U.S., persecutes and publicly executes postal carriers. Racked by guilt for their deaths, the postman, now effectively Postmaster General, orders the Postal Service to disband and writes a letter to the militia revealing it was formed on a lie. But Bethlehem, dismayed upon learning the restored U.S. has spread as far as California, redoubles his efforts to hunt down the postman. The postman, Abby, and a group of young postal carriers travel to Bridgetown, where they escape Wholeness Scouts with the help from the mayor and rally the population to resist Bethlehem. There, the postman and Abby reciprocate their feelings and fall in love. The postman organizes a restored U.S. Army more akin to a militia and face the Wholeness in a pitched battle. Unwilling to allow further bloodshed, the postman reveals to Bethlehem that he is Shakespeare and challenges him to a one-to-one duel for power. With their troops as witnesses per Wholeness tradition, Bethlehem accepts.
You're not a member of the clan. You don't have the right.
I have every right! I challenge the leadership of the clan! Where do I know you from? Cry havoc! And let slip the dogs of war! You remember that?
Shakespeare. One who didn't want to fight.
The postman wins the brutal hand-to-hand fight, but he spares Bethlehem's life to maintain morale. Bethlehem tries to shoot the postman as he turns, but is shot dead by Getty, who promptly disarms the Wholeness. 30 years later, in 2043, the postman dies at the age of 70. His adult daughter Hope speaks at a ceremony unveiling a memorial honoring his efforts in St. Rose, Oregon, part of the restored U.S. with the implication that modern society and technology have returned. Now, on to the review. So I'm just going to say that I like The Postman. Is it a good movie? Not really. It's not bad. The acting is great, especially by Will Patton, and the music is terrific. But, gratuitous shots by Costner and the ending kind of sucked the air out of the room, as well as the unneeded Tom Petty cameo. But to get it out of the way, before jumping into the real review, did this movie deserve 5 Razzies? Short answer, no. Long answer, no, absolutely not. And one of the reasons that I can say without a doubt that this movie was completely attacked and hated for some odd reason is because this movie came out in 1997. Guess what also came out in 1997? Batman and Robin. One of the worst, campiest, crappiest movies ever made. That movie sank careers, ended the golden age of Schwarzenegger, and could have turned Clooney back to General Hospital or ER, whatever he was on. I'm going to use David Brin's review of why he didn't think the movie worked out as a jumping point. He said, quote, "The right wing would hate him, aka Costner, for slapping down the malicious solipsist movement, while the leftists would despise him for depicting dignity and tolerance under the protection of the American flag. Above all, cynics would carp against the goodied morality tale." End quote. If you're wondering what solipsist is, I had to look it up. From what I read, it's basically, your libertarian militiamen who don't like the government and believe that they should live in a we do what we do world. They were very popular in the 90s. They're kind of gone now. They're still around, though, mainly in the West. But if you notice, though, this, by the way, was written in 1998. It's a lot of the same issues that we as Americans face today, so I guess it's comforting that we're repeating history. But some of the critics describe this movie as Frank Capra's, director of It's a Wonderful Life's, Mad Max movie. Which, yes, that's a good description. That's what this movie is, and I enjoyed that aspect. If everyone is constantly trying to create fiefdoms and lords over each other, nothing good ever comes about. Which is shown with the use of Will Patton, who has modern weaponry, but he and his men live in a quarry under the stars. While with Costner's character, by building up a community and creating a sphere of comfort, this will lead to trade, travel, and eventually innovation and invention. Maybe not as quickly as seen in the movie, but it would allow people to jump ahead of the feudal lordom. Also, if you walk the already well-treaded path, like Mad Max, which you can see with today TV shows like The Walking Dead, then why would you make this movie? Especially if you're just going to be Mad Max American Edition. Anyways, time to actually cover this movie and a few hiccups and issues I had with it. So this movie may be too campy for many of you. 90% of the people are good, kind-hearted individuals, while at the same time no one has the spine to stand up to the general. And instead just do everything that he says because they're that kind-hearted. At the same time, the general is bad, but he's not evil, while certain characters who serve the general definitely are. Costner's The Postman starts out human, and he stays relatively human throughout the whole movie. He finds a mail truck and decides to lie his way into a free meal and shelter. He feels guilt-tripped into taking the residents of Pine View's mail to a neighboring town. And he's wounded by the general's men, which leads him to taking shelter in a cabin, and he bellyaches of pain that probably has long since passed. And it doesn't really lay off from there, especially if you've seen the scene where he is terrified of the children under his command dying, and he starts doing hits on the general, taking routes from the children to prevent them from being killed. He's protecting his own, even if it means that he has to kill people to do it, while at the same time putting his own life on the line to protect those that he loves. It's idealistic. You wish that would happen in the real world, that men are inherently good and that we would all step up in order to do the better thing. At the same time, if you want it to be that idealistic, why is it children? Why aren't the adults stepping up and signing up to be postmen? If we all wish to return to the ways of old America and fly the stars and stripes, why aren't the older men and women signing up? Why is it the children? By the end, though, Costner abandons the idea of a very human character, and he embraces the campy hero with his flying into battle. Literally, if you include the mine car flying from Bridgetown as part of the final battle. But the same happens to our general, who at worst is a bad guy, who kills good people and terrorizes the community. But in order for you to truly understand that he's evil, they make sure to include the racial grouping slur, the N-word scene, and that everyone in the army is white. Then later in the movie, they include the murder of our heroine's husband, all because the general wishes to have sex with her. But if you kind of wonder why didn't they show him having a harem before, because he's going around, he could just claim any woman he wants to. Well, because that, I kind of feel they didn't want him to fall into the regular gaudy evilness path, that they wanted him to feel like a dictator who just does things willy-nilly. But you can tell it's just a means to make him more evil than he is. We know that he's a brutal dictator that kills people for disobeying him and robs towns for tribute. Many of it not of value, or at least not in a post-apocalyptic sense. But one final note of showing that he is in line with some of the most brutal and vicious villains of history, they make him a painter, and not a very good one.
But great men are made by other great men. Patton had Rommel. Grant had Lee. But I get you.
You know, General, you're not even a good painter.
So those uses of campiness and shaping our hero and villain into archetypes based on real and unrealistic individuals may turn you away, but if they don't, I do have a list that also clogs the movie a little. So let's cover this list real quick for this 3-hour movie, where I believe the movie went a little wrong. Number 1, introducing things and never discussing them again. For example, our hero suffers from auditory and visual hallucinations. In the opening minutes of the movie, our hero can hear bells rings for gas pumps and Monday Night Football, and he can even see people filling up their cars. And that is just abandoned the moment our hero leaves the gas station. Even though that could have been used as like a wonderful trait for our hero to suffer from in the movie, that he envisions a golden age of Americana, that his delusions lead him to founding the Postal Service. Maybe they were trying to be more in line with the book. But it should have just never been introduced if they weren't going to go through with it.
Sands through the hourglass. So are the days of our lives.
Monday.
Ready for Monday Night Football.
Number 2, the ending really sucked the wind out of the movie. I didn't mind seeing Patton lose or being killed by his own man, but I really wanted to see a battle. Everything felt like it was leading up to a clash of titans. 2 different ideologies would duel for the fate of Oregon, and it wasn't just going to be a simple duel between 2 gentlemen. Throughout the movie, they showcased the general's arsenal, so it felt like the people would really have to put their lives on the line if they wished for freedom. But instead, we get wrestling for a minute before Coster somehow wiggles his head out of a choke. And the other thing is, I don't quite understand the introduction of the California Republic Postman if they weren't going to play any part in the uprising against the general. You could have just rewritten the scene with the general wanting to keep Ford as his hostage in order to bargain and make the postman grovel. But no. Also, to point out a mistake, I was hoping for a big battle after seeing a trail of horses parading in the background on top of the mountain, thinking that maybe they were part of the California reinforcements that were going to circle and attack the general from behind. Nope, just an active horse trail in the background. That's all. Number 3, Tom Petty. I guess Costner is friends with Petty. I know Petty said in an interview he wanted to be in a post-apocalyptic movie, but his character and the scene in general weren't needed. Also, it doesn't make sense why the general's men would spot the postman and leave and not return with a gaggle of men to rape, pillage, and capture the postman. But hey, we had Tom Petty fulfill his dream of wanting to be in a Mad Max-style movie. Number 4, the length. I like long movies. I love Lord of the Rings, the extended editions. But this movie had plenty of moments where you could have snipped the scene or shortened it here or there and shaved off plenty of time. This movie had moments where it could have been transformed into 2, even 3 movies, really. After our hero escapes the general's custody by jumping off the bridge, you could have ended it right there. Or after the general attacks a small town and the postman saves Abby and he gets wounded in the process. Those 2 moments could have easily been the ending and the beginning of other movies. And this would have been better if they, just lonesome dubbed it. You turn it into a mini TV series, 4-parter, hour and a half each. In fact, a lot of movies could have been better as TV series or miniseries. Now, if you were going to keep this as a full-length movie, you can take this and probably shave 30 minutes out of it, if not a touch more, fairly easily. Like the ending with the speech by the daughter could have easily been trimmed out. The grabbing of the boy's letter didn't need 5 minutes of music and slow-mo horse riding. And, etc., like the brushing of the horse's teeth. Warner Brothers even told Costner nobody liked the length of his movie in 2 screen tests. 2 screen tests. Everyone hated the length, and Costner refused to cut it. Number 5. Introducing what could have been a mid-boss villain and killing them off in the first third of the movie. Same with good heroic characters. Point 5 is mainly aimed at Giovanni Ribisi, who apparently has always looked like a guy who sells dime bags. The introduction of this character and maybe the training officer were completely misused. Both of these characters are mid-tier bosses that you have to kill or confront at the end of Act 2, or they are the big bad in Act 3. That's why I believe that this kind of ties into point 4. If they simply made the movie into 2 movies or a miniseries, Giovanni's character could have been a fanatic kid that Costner's Postman took under his wing during training. Now he's the enemy. Or have it where the 2 disciples, or the guiding youths of Costner's character confront one another, Tate and Giovanni, but his character, I believe, is wasted, dying a pointless death.
I like the sound of that.
Stop.
I got him!
I'm sorry.
How come you wrecked it for me?
And I feel the same way about Costner's friend who was shot to death by the training officer, who then in turn was quickly mauled to death by a lion. I mean, if the training officer lived, his death would be something that the Postman could have gotten vengeance for during Act 2. I mean, they set him up to be this racist who wants to kill black people. So you have it where he's targeting Ford, and Costner's character saves Ford and kills this guy. But no, he's just dead within a few seconds after Costner's friend is killed. Number 6. Not a very post-apocalyptic or medieval world. Lack of foot traffic or trade, lack of decay, and lack of defense. The Postman lacks a lot of things to give it a more post-apocalyptic vibe. The buildings are still standing, roads are still paved, trails are still visible, and not a lot of destruction or people who look like they're living in the shambles of the world. Now, the movie starts off pretty well with the checking of water and the 76 gas station. Not so much looted, but ruined. Even the small town that he visits a little later looks like it's brand new, built by local timbers. But that is kind of thrown away further into the movie, with many places still having the same exact buildings as they did before the war and the famine and the plague. I understand after some reading that many of these places were filmed in real-world locations. You can't exactly tear up a road to make it look more authentic or rip down a building, but they did shoot up a small town according to some behind-the-scenes trivia. So they did have a budget to do that, so a little more ruin would have helped with the look. Also, no one is on the roads. One horseman is seen in the whole movie on the roads when another person is on the road at the same time, and it turns out to be another postman. This is just me being nitpicky, but how are the trails still outlined if no one is venturing on the roads? Having a few traveling traders here and there, maybe bringing and taking news or mail with them, would have helped sell the world a little more, along with some defenses. With 2 towns having a wall, while other towns are completely open, making them prime raider bait. So, the general doesn't even have a walled encampment himself, and he lives in a massive hole. A few trained soldiers could have easily wiped out the general's men, or at least caused some serious damage with the high ground. But all in all, a little more people movement, destruction, or nature taking over, and nice solid walls would sell that post vibe. And that's all the negatives that I can remember about the movie. A few are cosmetic, which don't ruin the movie. Others are abandoned ideas and character traits, and the length, which would greatly change the movie. But everything that's not listed in the negatives is great in this movie. The lighting is great because everything can be seen, the landscapes are lush, the acting's up to snuff, especially from Will Patton. If you don't like the acting, it's a fairy tale. So expect some performances to be over the top. The story is good and verging on corny, but it's not bad. It may be a little too idealistic for cynics of today and yesterday, but if you're a fan of, I would say Superman, the character, I can see this movie being right up your alley. It's all about the good in all of us wishing to return to a life before. Just imagine if The Walking Dead was all about trying to bring the United States back, building communities and restoring technology, instead of Raider drama every season. It may not get the same views, but it would at least be about trying to bring back normalcy. But like I said, everything that I didn't list in the negatives or in the review is good. Could it have been better? Yes. Would it have changed a lot to make it better? Not really. You're not trying to make it Mad Max with a heart of gold. You're just trying to make certain things a little more grounded and a little more realistic. But all in all, the movie is fairly average. It's a once in a lifetime watch and you'll probably never watch it again. But that's it for today. Outside of that, you guys have a good one. Bye.